What is up, fellow geeks? This is Ike coming back at you with yet another video. So you're probably wondering, Ike, we've been enjoying the content so far. What else you have for us? Well, first, thank everybody for liking, subscribing, and everything else to the YouTube channel and checking out the video so far. I hope you've enjoyed everything. Today, I am actually here with you with some content of my own, just some stuff that I've actually been working on. I have a lot of notes, so let's go ahead and get right into it. Today, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to be taking a little bit of a different approach than what we've done so far, and this is just going to be kind of talking about movies, but not just talking about movies. Today, we're actually I'm going to actually try and convince you over the course of the 3 videos or so. I'm trying to convince you that there is a single movie within all of these zombie movies that have ever been made that is more important than all of the others. And you're probably thinking to yourself, what could that be? What movie is the most important in the entirety of a zombie movie collection? I mean, there are hundreds, thousands probably, maybe even more, tens of thousands. So I'm going to try today to convince you that the most important zombie movie of all time is Night of the Living Dead. So you're probably thinking, how could Night of the Living Dead, a black and white movie from 1968, be the single most important zombie movie of all time? Well, I'm glad you asked. But to kind of get into that, we're going to first discuss basically where did zombie movies start and how did we get to Night of the Living Dead. So first we're going to talk about some older zombie flicks, some zombie movies that a lot of folks probably haven't seen, or if you have seen them, you've seen them in passing. But these are some fairly old movies from the 30s, 40s, and I believe 50s is maybe one of them. But they kind of fall into 2 distinct genres, and it's sort of unique how they came about. But primarily the 2 that I want to kind of focus on, in case people have never seen them, this is maybe a recommendation for you to watch them just to kind of get an idea of these old zombie movies, or maybe even just to kind of get an idea of what zombies were, because zombies were not always what you think that they were. So we're going to get into that. But first, let's start with a little bit of history. Zombie movies and the concept of zombies, there's not really a distinct area that zombies really originated from. A lot of folks do seem to think that the concept of an undead creature comes sort of from the idea of a vampire. A lot of people kind of correlate the 2, especially when you think of like the history of modern media. A lot of people will correlate the concept of a vampire to that of a zombie, which isn't obviously too far off. They are very similar at their roots, that they are both undead. Obviously, the concept of a vampire is a little more what I would say, comparatively, a zombie is a little less functional, typically in modern culture, than a vampire is. But probably one of the first zombie movies that a lot of folks would think back to is White Zombie. So White Zombie is a form of zombie movie. Obviously, it is not the traditional flesh-eating zombie that you and I think of when we think of zombies. That didn't really come along until a little bit later, but the concept of a zombie in those times was that of a voodoo zombie. So you're probably thinking, a voodoo zombie. What exactly is a voodoo zombie? So there were other films that kind of fell into the same area, things like Voodoo Island or Curse of the Doll People, which were both, all 3 of those, including White Zombie, were all films that kind of revolved around the basis and the idea that they were voodoo zombies. Voodoo zombies were more just people being taken over by some sort of magic and then being forced to do the bidding of the whomever used the magic. So you're probably thinking as well, did they eat people? I've seen some media that would suggest that these voodoo zombies can consume other humans, but most of the time voodoo zombies were made in a fashion that they were just used as a tool to attack other people. So the original basis was not that of flesh-eating zombies, but more just mindless minions who were being used at the whim of whomever controlled them. So then the next type of zombie that a lot of people may or may not know of, and actually this is something interesting that I at least recently learned about, but there was a movie based off of the book I Am Legend. So you're probably thinking, oh, you're talking about the Will Smith I Am Legend. No, I am not. There was a movie a while ago, I don't have the date off the top of my head, but it was prior to the 60s, called The Last Man on the Earth, starring Vincent Price. Vincent Price in of himself is I mean, he was a household name for many decades, and I would even say that he is an actor who has created many milestones of his own in the film universe. So definitely that was an interesting thing to see, is that The Last Man on the Earth was actually based on I Am Legend, which is interesting because it was they're sort of zombies, but they're more vampiric, kind of like you see in I Am Legends, that they don't come out during the day, but they're not really vampires because they just ravage and attack, and it's a virus. So it's kind of weird, but kind of zombie, but kind of vampire. And the only reason I brought that up is because it definitely propelled the idea of this science fiction and popular culture to kind of project additional movies, not necessarily based on I Am Legend specifically, but other movies that would come later in life, more sci-fi driven things, sci-fi driven viruses, if you will, and things of that nature. So that was definitely an interesting take that I saw, being the Last Man on the Earth with Vincent Price. So that was just a brief overview of just a few films that kind of, in my opinion, developed the concept of a zombie in its tentative and early years. Now, obviously, the concept of a flesh-eating zombie would come later, and some people kind of dispute this. They say that there may have been films that maybe alluded to a flesh-eating zombie prior to George Romero, which may be true, but in my opinion, the most popular form of media that shows a flesh-eating zombie is the 1968 classic, The Night of the Living Dead. Like I said, there probably are other movies, but it kind of boils down to a form of semantics where we say, okay, yes, there are other films that show flesh-eating zombies, but Night of the Living Dead was the one that was able to propel itself into popular culture. Night of the Living Dead was one of those movies that you could go watch in a theater. It wasn't necessarily, I don't want to say an indie film, but, it wasn't a 50s or 60s version of what we can consider an indie film or an underground film. And there are obviously other cult classics that fall into that same category. Movies like The Evil Dead, who didn't really have popularity in their time per se, but have really struck a chord with a modern audience. And Night of the Living Dead has that, but it also had a popularity during its day. So the 1968 Night of the Living Dead, in my opinion, would be the start of what I would consider the modern zombie age. But in addition to that, is one of the most important films of all time. It was revolutionary. Obviously, I'm not going to give too many spoilers for it in case you've never seen it. If you've never seen Night of the Living Dead, go watch it. But Night of the Living Dead had what I would consider to be one of the first, it had an ending that was, it was suspenseful. You didn't know what was going to happen. And when it happened, you were surprised. You were shocked. And not only that, but the film, it is not only just a masterpiece, but it also has so many layers. You have the concept that Night of the Living Dead had more meaning than just, it wasn't just the surface level movie. There was a lot of details that people, didn't really realize until later. George Romero was one of those directors that always has subliminal meaning. For instance, his film Dawn of the Dead, it was a film that was supposed to not only talk about zombies, but it was supposed to be sort of a mocking of a consumerism. We were living in a consumerism society. We had malls and everything else. And that was something we'll get into a little bit more, but all of his films have that. And a lot of people agree that Night of the Living Dead had a subliminal message of why racism is bad, which during the 60s, that was an incredibly important ideology because, that was the era of, not necessarily peak racism, of course, but it was an era of great, what I would say, great, horrific nature, and it had a lot of turmoil for that community. And I feel like Night of the Living Dead gave it sort of a spotlight, but also was able to create a movie about zombies and be popular. And in my opinion, it was one of those movies that started to step in the direction of modern filmmaking. It was still in black and white, but it still has a taste of what we would see in the 70s, 80s, and 90s when it came to zombie films and things of that nature. So I think that's enough for now talking about Night of the Living Dead and talking about these old versions of zombie films, because the next thing we're going to talk about is George Romero's legacy. George Romero would leave a legacy of zombie movies for years and years and years to come. George Romero is what, in my opinion, probably one of the most important filmmakers of all time, not just for zombie culture, but for the horror genre, but also just general filmmaking. George Romero had an akin to not using special effects. Obviously, special effects may have not have been available during some of his, early years, but especially in later films, he continues to use actual practical effects, which is something that was not common in the genre. Movies like World War Z, which are fantastic movies in the modern genre, obviously that's more of a newer example, but, George Romero has always believed in most of his films that practical effects over visual and special effects, because his zombie movie is not a zombie movie if the zombies are fake, in my opinion, and I think in his opinion too. But overall, the George Romero would leave a legacy that would honestly inspire not only other filmmakers, but would also inspire an entire genre, an entire subsection of what we consider to be modern zombies. And in the next video, we're going to talk about his legacy and what he left behind and what we have to remember him by, but also what we have to pursue future movies in the genre and other things of that nature. So check it out next. But for right now, thank you so much for watching. Please like and subscribe to the channel, and we'll check you next time on part 2 of why Night of the Living Dead is the single most important zombie movie in all of popular culture. Thank you.